call the, I haven't done this in a while. The Planning Commission for June 12th to order. Can you take a roll call, please?
Commissioner Barron,
Here.
Commissioner Rana, Chair Woodson,
Here.
Commissioner Chang,
Here.
Commissioner St. John,
Here.
Commissioner Jacobson.
Here.
Motion, you have quorum.
Thank you very much. All right. We go ahead and do a moment of silence and pledge of allegiance. Would somebody like to do the pledge today?
I'd be happy.
Yeah.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks. All right. All right, next up is special announcements or communications from the floor. Anybody have any announcements to make today? All right, moving on. Next thing is up is ex parte communications for quasi judicial matters. Do we have anything, actually, hold on for a minute. Special announcement communications to the floor. Is there anybody, there's nobody here. Is there anybody from the public that is online that would like to speak on an issue that is not up on the agenda for today?
No, Chair Woodson.
Okay. All right, now moving on. Ex parte communications for quasi judicial matters. Anything that the commissioners have? The all negative headshot nods, and it's not opposite day, so we have nothing. Moving on to the next, we have the consent agenda. On the consent agenda, we have, let's see, the only thing we have is approval of the minutes for April 10th. Okay. Any comments or adjustments to the minutes? And again, nothing. So can we take a vote count on approval of the minutes, please?
I move we approve the minutes.
Second.
A second.
Commissioner Barron,
Yes.
Commissioner Rana, Chair Woodson,
Yes.
Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner St. John,
Yes.
Commissioner Jacobson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
I don't know what I'm thinking, because now we go to public hearings. All right, so today on public hearings, we have two items. One on public hearing on accessory fence ordinances. Then first off, we have the medical facility site tree removal permit, and this is only to cover the removal permit and the grading plan at this point. So that's the only thing being discussed on the parcels today. Rita, I think you're the one presenting.
I am the one presenting. We did have some technical difficulties, so I want to just make sure. Edry, can you hear me from, if you just give a thumbs up if you can hear us? Great. So Edry is our awesome engineer. He's only available till 7:30 today. So if you have grading questions or engineering questions, we have limited time with him. So we're trying to front load the agenda. Welcome to the Planning Commission. We've had several cancellations this year, but thank you for continuing to volunteer with us. So this is phase 3 of the dune. So there have been multiple phases to the project. Phase 3, we're getting towards the end for the project, and this is an exciting opportunity. So just a little bit of history of this tree removal permit. It was filed on March 7th. We did a site visit with the tree committee on May 15th. The tree committee made a recommendation to the Planning Commission for the entire removal of the trees. And about 2 weeks after we had a meeting with the tree committee, there was a request from the developer to split the tree permit into 2. One on the future medical facility site, and then 2 for the future car dealership site, so that the medical site could be made available and that the dirt could be stockpiled onto the car dealership site. So this is an aerial view. Where the medical facility site would go is generally at the corner of Second and Devarty. So that's this general area. And then the car dealership site is where the green dot is at on the screen. So the trees in question are the ones identified here, as well as in the arborist report that was provided to the planning commission. These are the ones that are being recommended for removal. And this is the grading plans are several sheets, but this is just the summary of the grading plans. In the red denotes where dirt would be moved, and green is where dirt would be added to. So basically, as we've said, all the trees in question, for the most part, are in the red and do need to be removed. And then that dirt will be moved over to the car dealership site. So that's the next. But the reason why we're bringing this in two parts is because the car dealership site has not submitted a formal application yet, and the planning commission can't vote on removing these trees until the formal application for the car dealership is submitted. So that's why we're trying to split up the application. There was a question about tree 1924, which we can go over later. It is dead. And so basically there are 11 trees in question. One of them is dead. 10 of them are healthy and do need to replace at a 2-to-1 ratio. And the dirt from the Kaiser site would be moved into 2 large stockpiles onto the car dealership site. And there will be a fence installed. This black fence clearly will be denoted to say, anybody who has any way of touching this permit, do not touch the trees on the car dealership site, because those have not been recommended for approval by the planning commission. And just to make it abundantly clear, that was spelled out in the conditions of approval in multiple, very clearly stated conditions, so there can be no ambiguity. Do not touch the trees on the car dealership site. Those have not been approved. And so anytime we bring an action before the planning commission, we do have to find consistency with the general plan. The general plan does call for a balanced use of land uses within the city. So by providing a future medical facility site, this project will be supporting general plan policies 2.74 and 4.79, which mandates that we have a balanced use of land uses in the city, as well as provide sites that support employment and economic development. So this is the recommended motion. It's in your staff report, and it's also up on the screen. And now I can take initial questions.
Sure. Thank you very much, Leo. Okay, so I have a few comments, but I'll save them. I'll start. Anybody have comments? Commissioner St. John.
Yeah, I attended the May site visit representing as my representative to the tree committee. And we walked the medical use facility and the car dealership site and put our eyes, if not our arms, around every tree that was there. And we requested at the time that the developer take a closer look at some of the trees in the car dealership area, but that one is not the focus of tonight. For the medical use facility, my memory was that we didn't have any qualms or questions about the trees that were nominated to come down because we understood that the cutting and filling, that they were all either in the middle of or their roots were encroaching upon the cut area and that they wouldn't survive no matter what. So the tree committee was was in favor of those tree removals. So that's all I have for me.
Great. Thanks for the update from the tree committee input and discussions. Anyone else have any questions that they want to raise? Mr. Chang?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. My question is to Guido, I believe the city have the mitigation monitoring and reporting programs. It's not attached to the reports here.
Usually an MMRP is done when you have a mitigated neg deck or an EIR. This project, we're going under the old EIR that was done way back like in 2005. So I typically don't add the MMRP into these staff reports. We can certainly do that if we would like, but for today, we don't have that in front of you guys today.
Okay, would be nice to have a update one for this particular programs.
Okay.
And the next question I had is understand the 11 tree that will be removed and replaced with 20 trees.
Right.
And who will be, what kind of trees will be replaced and also who will be responsible for maintaining it?
Yeah, so under condition of approval number 4, it's on page 15 of your packet. There is a 2-to-1 replacement.
Yeah.
Currently, we're putting that on the Shea Homes team. But the site will be a future Kaiser facility, so that will eventually get transferred over to the Kaiser folks, but that is a good question. If the commission wants to add language to condition of approval number 4 saying existing developer, or however we want to phrase it, future users of the medical site, they will be required to comply with condition of approval number 4. That is a reasonable request.
Okay, so the
So-
city will not be responsible, correct?
No, it's the developer. It's their responsibility.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Any more questions?
Any more questions? Kind of roll through some. Okay, I have a couple. So can you go to, it's hard to tell in the picture. So if you could you go to page 8 of the packet so that we can look at the overview of the overall site? It's exhibit 1 of the site plan.
Exhibit 1, sure. No problem. Well, let me,
It's
I
the one
don't,
it was the one you were literally just showing in the slide that has
oh,
the
okay.
cut and fill.
No problem. No, 1 second. Give me a second. Here we go. Here we go. Let me, is it this one, Chair Woodson? Just the one?
That will totally work.
Okay.
All right, so I understand that red is cut, green is fill. All of the cut from the project is going to be moved into OP 3.2 and be banked into 2 piles, one at the north end and one at the south end of 3.2. Totally makes sense. Understand the 12 trees that were identified. The tree in question that I want to ask about is tree number 1829, which is in OP 4.2 in the white section. It's kind of the tree that sits all by itself in the middle.
Right.
So, and you can't really see it in this one,
1829, is that?
1829.
Okay.
It is on page 76 of our overall packet. And the picture on page 76 kind of does it justice, but not completely. The question that comes up with 1829 is that from this angle, the tree kind of looks straight, but you can see it at angles a little bit to the left. That's actually looking from east, looking westward
Right.
towards the ocean. If you were standing on the south side of that tree where Devardi used to be, and we're looking north towards the tree, you would see
Right.
that tree is tilted at about 15 to 20 degrees. And so my kind of question coming back to this is, I'm all about saving trees. I'm not sure if that tree, even if it's healthy, at the angle that it's at, how is it ultimately going to be maintained? And is this a tree that we really would rather have recommended for removal and replacement? Because I am not sure it's where it's sitting from a development perspective, but also really from just a angle of usage
Uh-huh.
that it even makes sense. And I think part of it's that that tree set up against the edge of a building that used to be there. And so it grew at an angle because of that building. It couldn't grow straight.
It's in poor condition. It says 1829. Sooty mold structural. It's on page 41. So yeah, if the commission wants as part of this action, you can direct staff, which would be me, to work with the applicant to, potentially look at tree 1829. And if the commission's okay, we can, if however we want to phrase it, that we would work with the applicant and potentially recommend removal. That's certainly within your right. So.
Any other input on that one? I mean, Commissioner St. John, I know you were out there and did the walkthrough of that.
Yeah, I don't remember a focus on that tree, but just a question, is that part of the medical facility? It's not in the,
So yeah, I think it's in that, I think it's in the gray area because it's bounded by, it's bounded as part of OP3 or 3.3.
OP 4.2.
Right. So I guess I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's not in the land of discussion. But it's a good point, and I think Guido can get with the developer about it for when they do want to work on that area.
Well, and my kind of take is if they get to a point where they develop 4.2, it's a single tree that's sitting right there. It's
And,
what I have seen and
and that picture even shows what you say.
yeah, and a concern that I've had over time is and is across the board is that we don't ask and we don't look at overlapping projects that are ancillary to each other that make the most sense while a team is mobilized out there. And if there's a team that's mobilized out there to remove those 11 trees, and it makes sense that eventually we're going to remove this 12th tree. Well, we're going to remove 12 trees. One's already dead. And there's this 13th tree that
It's 10 trees, and it's the 11th is the dead.
so 10 trees, one dead, so 11 trees plus one, that's actually 12. So plus one would be 12.
Yeah.
Since they're already out there. Like I said, I would just just to kind of look at that and see. If the answer is no, the answer is no, but I just like it to be looked at right now, if that makes sense.
That's fine. Edry, he said he had some comments. He has a raised hand. So go ahead, Edry.
Sure.
No, I have a street shot of that tree and it is pretty diagonal.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead and show it if you want
Is this the tree in question?
Yeah.
Yeah,
about
that's pretty
15, about 15, about 15, 20 degrees, about 20, yeah, maybe close to 30
Yeah.
degrees. So that's exactly it. That is the tree right there.
It's the only one. Yeah.
to.
So
Yeah, we can certainly take a look at that.
I mean,
Eric, so
I feel for the tree because the tree has survived having a building growing up right next to it. Now it's just, it's free to grow by itself. But I think in the long term, even when that's developed, that tree would come back before us anyway. It's just, unfortunately, I just think it picked the wrong place to grow 30 years ago.
Yep. We can certainly take a look at that.
Okay. So that was one question I had. So that was kind of the biggest ones. Second one I have is, and again, understanding that we don't know where the new trees are going to go, what the new trees are going to be used for, and what type of trees are going to go in. And it goes back to a bigger discussion we've had for years now about should we put in 15-gallon trees or should we look at 24-inch box trees primarily? And I think where I've kind of come to rest over time, and I really would love some input from others, is that if it's a standard filler tree that is just part of the mix, then a 15-gallon tree makes the most sense on the Central Coast. I've had enough conversations with people on the tree committee and in the community that from a transplant shock perspective and growth perspective, that going to a larger tree doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to grow faster or grow better or anything else after 10 years. At the same time, I think that when a tree gets transplanted and or when we go to put in a new tree, and that tree is going to be a defining kind of feature tree for that property, that at that point, do we want to reconsider and think, okay, in those one-off instances where there's the minority, so let's say there are two feature trees that help define the building or the property when you're coming into it. Having a 24-inch box tree for those first 3 to 5 years really does make a difference on street appeal and visualization that you just can't get out of a 15-gallon tree. And again, after 10, 15 years, everything kind of catches because trees 25 to 30 feet tall, 35 feet, nobody can really tell the difference from the surface. But for those first few years, I think it makes a difference. And so what I've been mulling in my head for a while now is that could we create a condition that if during development, a tree that is on the list, so in this case, it would be 22 trees, were being put in, and it was being designated as a feature tree for that facility, that if it is designated as a feature tree, that we would recommend it instead of going to a 15-gallon, that we would go to a box tree instead. And or Edria, of your opinion on that also, but I'm going to open that up to the rest of the commission to kind of see what your input is.
Chair, who would determine that it's a featured tree? I mean, that sounds fairly subjective to me.
Guido?
I mean, just trying to riff off what the chair's saying. I mean, the commission could add a condition that says where feasible, 24-gallon tree can be a replacement. I would point out that the 15-gallon has typically been used throughout the Dunes project, so we would have to have some uniformity on the commission if this is what, but instead of saying a landmark tree, we could just, where feasible, add it, so we get some flexibility to work with the applicant, because I don't have an actual site plan for the medical facility site, so I'm not sure if I want to tie myself or the applicant down when I don't kind of know the landscaping yet of that facility. But
Right, and it
if
could be
it's put at, if applicable and if feasible, that kind of language so staff can work with the applicant, that seems reasonable to me.
And we did that, and we could always come back. If the better time to bring this up is when we get to the site planning and design standard review.
That probably would be a better spot.
And then we put it there. I think I just would like it discussed at some point. And to me, a feature tree, and to address your comment about Shea, the rest of the Shea properties, even the promenade, are all very much linked together as a single property. I mean, it's primarily residential, then mixed use commercial residential.
Mhm.
This is a commercial hospital. I mean, it's going to be butting up against the edge of the property, but it is a different, on intensive purposes, at least in my head, it's going to be probably a different facility. I'll have a different type of landscaping. It's just going to look different. But if we want to, as long as we can talk about it later and bring it up, I'm fine with tabling
Absolutely.
it to a later
Absolutely.
later
That's
conversation.
completely appropriate when we have the site plan. That design review permit will absolutely come before the planning commission. And
So-
they'll presumably have a draft landscaping plan, and you guys will get to chew on that. So that now that we're talking about, that does seem like a better spot to address that issue.
Okay, so if we can just leave that as a staff request action to just ensure that we include that in the notes for whenever we get that plan to bring it up for
Absolutely.
discussion.
Absolutely.
So that was my second. And then my third, and this is, I understand putting in a fence. I understand the warnings. I understand everything else. I also understand that when trees have been mistakenly removed by some of our developers over time, we really have not had much of a consequence that we could place on the developer for doing it. I mean, it's pretty much, oh, sorry, made a mistake. And it's, well, what can we do? Well, you're going to replace it at 2-to-1. There just hasn't been a penalty or a consequence. In the civil world, you can claim treble damages. And so what I'm wondering is,
I would just politely, so I've been with the project when the last tree issue popped up in April of 2022. And I would politely push back and say it actually wasn't a minor thing. Basically, all development stopped for like 6 weeks because the commission got involved, the council got involved, community members, we had to have community meetings. I had to have a special meeting with the council to articulate where were some errors, maybe or things that staff could have been doing.
Well, I think
And
that-
time is money for the developer. And so I would say, it wasn't an insignificant, and when we had this issue come up in April of 2022, they acknowledged that it was a major error. We did make them actually plant 42 trees to replace the 7 that were. And so there are provisions in our code that if you remove a tree illegally, there's a 3-time penalty on top of the 2-to-1.
So that's what I want.
So I would just say politely that the record is actually, there was quite a bit of cost to the developer in terms of time. And then we did the 42 trees that are behind the Cinemark. Those were all planted because of the 7. So yeah, just wanted to correct the record there.
Oh, that's fine. What I was trying not to highlight a specific developer. But now that that's come out, and coming back to that, this is where I'm going with it specifically, is kind of following through that same kind of concept of this. Trouble means 3 times 2-to-1 means 6, and that's what we did. We did a 6-to-1 instead of a 2-to-1. Could we write a condition into this instead of just saying, okay, we put a fence up, we've done everything else, that if that does occur, and again, this might be a better item to be tabled, but I think now is the issue because we are doing disturbance over there, that if one of these trees in that area is removed mistakenly, that it does not get replaced at a 2-to-1, and it gets replaced at a 6-to-1 ratio.
The commission certainly has that right, but that is actually already in our municipal code. So if something happens and the applicant is aware, I've had this conversation multiple times with the applicant, but if the commission wants to add a condition to reference, and Nick and I can find that part of actually, Nick's the tree committee staffer. He could probably find it faster than I can. If you want to try to look up the muni code, the 3-to-1 penalty, we can certainly add that as a condition. That's fine.
And the only reason I do that is it keeps it as a proactive without actually harping. It's, look, it's here, things happen. But I also want to address that because to that point it did, and you're right, I was trying not to bring a specific issue case into it. I was just trying to, but now that we've addressed that, it was a massive community discussion point at the time, and it has driven a lot of changes on how that park has been built as a result. And nobody wants that to happen again.
Right.
At the same time, I think from a public perspective, we want to make sure that it's like you said, it's easy for one person who works on the tree committee to go out there and find that in the regulations. It's another thing when if somebody wants to go to the conditions here and they see it written in our conditions that, okay, we have pulled that forward as a citation so that people can see, okay, we are trying to be proactive about this to ensure that that doesn't happen.
That's certainly within the right of the commission. And do you have the section, Nick, up if you want to quote it to the commission?
Sure. It says healthy trees to be removed on a minimum of 2-for-1 basis or multiplied by 3 for each tree moved in violation of this chapter.
And that's what section of the code?
That's section 1762-060, subsection D, paragraph 2.
Okay. So that's certainly within the commission's right. So
So I think from my perspective, those were the only things I had. And they were
Thank you.
kind of changes that I wanted to bring the commission as possible discussion points. Commissioner Chen.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. In response to Chair's comments, I think if we have the MMRP, I think some of the point will be clarified, will be when, so like the size of plants that we're going to replace. And also in the mitigation strategy, also talking about the type of trees that we're going to have, the species, and to have a variety instead of one specific type.
right.
Yeah, so if even though if we could prepare the MMRP and then at least, the commission here would know what specifically will be done for the replacement.
So let's get into MMRP. So I used to write EIR, so I can speak to this. So whenever you write an EIR,
Mhm.
there are mitigation monitoring reporting program. That's what the MMRP language is. And it's basically the requirement of the lead agency, which we would be. We certify what you do as an EIR is you officially certify the EIR. And as part of the EIR certification, you agree basically forever and ever to implement the MMRP to mitigate the impacts of the project. So I've worked on projects that have lasted many years. An MMRP requirement could be, hey, fix that stoplight, or the road has to become 2 lanes instead of 1 lane, right? So that would be in an EIR. Then that's usually where you kick off the whole project. This is more of replacement of trees. I could try to look back in the original EIR. There could be some stuff in there, but I doubt it would get to that level of specificity about the trees. But I can certainly take a look if you'd like, Commissioner Chang.
Well, replacement of the tree is only one of the sections, and you could have the planting plan and the maintenance and monitoring and enforcement and financial assistance. So at least we know when everything is done, we won't be responsible, but the developer and Kaiser will be responsible maintaining it. And then the other thing is the planting seasons. When are we going to replace it? So once you have this MMRP, everything is clear, right?
Well, yes and no. For an EIR, the MMRP probably wouldn't be the best avenue. I think when the medical Kaiser site comes back, I think having very strongly, clearly worded conditions of approval, I think that's the better avenue for the commission, because most people won't go back and look at the 2005 EIR. They'll come and ask us, hey, what are the conditions of approval on the project? So I think that would be a better avenue. That would be my recommendation to this body. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
but if there's interest, I can do a training with the commission about MMRPs and CEQA and EIR and all that other stuff. So,
Okay. Thank you.
Let's come back to that at the end of the meeting tonight, Guido. Commissioner Arana.
Okay, my question is that there are 2 parties involved in the whole process, the developer who is the applicant now, and then the end user, which is going to be the health facility owner or the management. So now the applicant gets the permission, he removes the trees, he has the plans, he replaces the plans also. But the end user, somehow it does not fit into his plans as to number of trees and the quality or the type of trees. So who coordinates that both the requirements are met, and at what stage this coordination happens?
and there's actually 3 parties involved. So there's the car dealership, there's the Kaiser site, and then there's the dunes. So it's a good point. So that would be something that staff would do. And actually, as I'm talking to the commission once again, condition of approval number 4, it's probably, now that I'm talking to the commission, it's probably a good idea to say the current applicant or the end user of the medical site shall be responsible for ensuring the replacement trees are planted. So to make it abundantly clear, so that can certainly be added to condition of approval number 4. So, because you are right, there is a little bit of coordination among all the different parties. That's a very good point, Commissioner Rana. So,
So I do have one grading question. So I should have just done this one first, but it should be pretty relatively easy. All right, so when all the material gets cut and it gets brought over to the 2 spoils piles to be banked, since that is going to be used for development of OP 3.2 eventually, so that's the way I understood it. which is not on discussion for today. I'm assuming that we talked about the fence on the west-hand side, which is really to protect the trees. Want to make sure that swales and sedimentate and runoff protection, are they going to be put around those piles, or are the piles just going to sit open?
That's a great question. That's something Edric can answer. So,
Yes, sure thing. So depending on how long the stockpiles will be there, we will have what's called construction best management practices, or BMPs, applied. This whole site, all of the dunes Pacific Plan area, is under a stormwater protection plan, or a SWIP plan. And part of that plan includes stockpile protection from runoff and erosion. So if you could see on that plan set, there's a very dark line too on the top that kind of squiggles down. There we go. And it's hard to see, but along that line, the developer is also constructing a swale so that it protects any runoff from entering into the tree area or going down that slope as well. They're even building 2 erosion control drainage basins along that slope to collect the stormwater if that site is going to be graded for that long. But they've applied different best management practices, or BMPs, to the site to protect erosion and protect runoff into the northern area or the western area.
Okay, and I think that was ultimately where I was trying to get to, was if this turns into something that is longer term and gets into the rainy season, which it probably will into next year, were we protecting the piles, or were we protecting the site? And your answer is it's protecting the site. So that was my
Technically both, but yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, one protects the bigger one is if
Yes.
we get runoff, then we need to make sure it doesn't leave the site. So the site portion of it was the bigger concern to me, without getting into the site planning side of that area. That was the main question that I had on it. Any other questions on grading? Anybody? Just me, the only one. All right. Okay, so I think we're back to let's come back to it. Were we in agreement to add, we're going to add 3, we're amend the conditions add 3 conditions or 3 amendments to it. The first was Shay, or the current user of the medical site. And what I would prefer is, instead of just saying the medical site, is say, since it's OP 4.3, is define it as OP 4.3.
okay.
Then the second one is a citation on penalties for citing the replacement value of
Or
6
replace
the citation on
trees.
the penalties to replace it at 6-to-1
So
ratio.
that would be condition of approval number 11 then.
Correct.
Number 11, to cite the penalty provisions of the code. Penalty provisions of code. All right.
And then I guess that's it, because what we agreed on was that we're going to table the condition discussion on the idea of feature or landmark trees until we get to the landscape plan down the road
Mhm.
as a staff action.
Mhm.
Okay. So we have 1 tabled item and 2 conditional changes. Is that an agreement to everybody?
Yes.
Commissioner Barron did have a question about tree 1924.
Okay.
Let me pull that up before, just so that we can. So I did circle back with the applicant. They are on the phone if you have further questions, but
So while you're looking that up, Edric, I don't think we have any more grading questions. I know you had a prior commitment that you had to go to. So
thank you for your time.
I
Thank you.
appreciate your time tonight.
Take care.
So Commissioner Barron, I did circle back with the applicant. They did confirm that tree is dead. That's that. Okay, that,
Lying down. Yep. See, that's not what mine says.
so,
Oh,
yeah.
See, they don't really point, yeah, see, somebody amended it.
Oh, okay,
on the
well,
TV.
that's,
I mean,
that's what was conveyed to me. So
Yeah.
and I don't know. Let me check if Patrick's on the,
So it's a different tree. It's the one that's
So-
lying down. Okay.
I don't see Patrick on the phone. So, Yeah.
Right. It's, yeah, my arrow's just going the wrong way.
Okay. If the commission wants, I can go take it out there with the applicant and we can verify whatever that tree is. If that's part of the motion, we can certainly follow up. So,
I think the only two trees that are really remaining are 1872 and 1987. And they, if you're out there, they stand out. Yeah, 1870 and 1924 are sitting right next to each other. I think what's happened was the arrow was pointing more towards 1870 versus
Right.
1924.
Yes.
But they're the same thing, and they can literally sit on top of each other, and they both are sitting in the middle of the main cut that's going to have to occur.
yeah.
Do we need anything else about that? Do you have any? Question? I didn't catch that. Guido,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
on page, what page is it? On page 13? It says approximately 11 trees.
The page 13 is the beginning of the recitals or the resolution. It says, whereas removal of 11 trees within opportunity area 4.3. Is that what you're referring to? Right, that's what I'm reading from. I put approximately because I've been a planner for 20 years, and if there's some magically a 12th tree pops up,
Well, and
I don't really think the applicant or you guys want me to come back to you with the full staff report and I feel that's within staff's discretion to,
And I
you
don't,
know, if it's 1.5 tree, or if this thing drags on and there's another tree out there that wasn't a tree and then magically
well,
grows to be a tree, I don't think you guys want me to come back for one tree.
I added a
That's-
tree.
So,
I literally added a tree to
So-
the staff to look at,
okay,
correct?
so,
I mean, that was the other thing that we talked about was adding tree 1829 to the discussion as a staff requirement to meet with the developer.
right.
So I think if, in that I think would that be considered a good example of how the approximate comes in?
Exactly. But obviously,
That's a good question.
It's a
context question. Understand the context behind it.
possible for
Because I think by leaving the approximate, it allows us to, just like we're doing, address tree 1829. To look at it and say, okay, we have 11 trees, but there's another tree we would like you to coordinate with and look at. So if we leave it straight, it becomes a defined value. But that I didn't catch that, but if that would have been a question I would have had too, if I had actually been careful about my reading.
it was a good catch. Thank you,
That's
Commissioner.
why we
Barry.
have a commission. And together we equal one good mind.
Yes.
That was very rude.
So I haven't written out the official language, but if you see up on the screen, I've added 3 more recommendations. So add language into the COA citing the penalty provisions of the code. Add language to condition of approval number 4 stating the current applicant or future successors to the permit shall be responsible for the replacement, and that the staff will coordinate with the applicant on tree 1829 and 1924. So,
I'm fine with 7, 8, and 9 being added. Everybody else? All right, does somebody want to make a motion? Wow, everybody
I'll
jump
make-
at this one today. I
I'll make the motion.
need to pull the motion up, please.
It's up on your screen. Should be up on your screen now.
The recommended slide.
Yeah,
that's the
recommendation
motion.
side.
That's it. Okay. Read on, sir. Okay, the motion is with reference to this area, opportunity area 4.3, otherwise known as the medical facility site, to approve and the removal of 11 trees within the opportunity area 4.3, subject to chapter 17.62 of the Marina Municipal Code. Require that the applicant, Marina Community Partners, replant replacement trees at a ratio of 2:1 for every tree that is removed. Item 4, require that the applicant comply with the conditions of approval and the recommendations in the arborist report submitted by Denise Duffy and Associates on April 18th, 2025 and May 12th, 2025, incorporated by reference into this resolution. Item 5, determine that the approval does not constitute approval of the record of any trees identified in the April 18th, 2025 arborist report, except those within opportunity area 4.3. Number 6, find that any environmental impacts from the recommended action have been previously reviewed in the environmental impact report for the University Village specific plan EIR number 20040911167. Item 7, add language into the COAs citing the penalty provisions of the code. Item 8, add language to the COA 4 stating the current applicant or future successors to the permit shall be responsible for the replacement trees being removed. And item 9, recommend coordinate with applicant on trees 1829 and trees 1924.
I have a clarification and potentially a friendly amendment. Just want to make sure that in bullet 5, we talk about opportunity area 4.3, knowing that tree 1829 is in different area.
Oh, that's a good catch. Coordinate with the applicant on tree what was the one on
It's in 1829 is in OP 4.2.
identified within, identified in opportunity area
4.2.
4.2. Okay,
No, oh, yeah, okay. I saw a 3 for a minute.
So that was my friendly amendment was to recommend adding identified in opportunity area 4.2 to bullet number 9 for tree 1829.
It's freely agreed.
Do you, okay. Right. So do we have a second on the amended motion? Okay, Commissioner Rana seconds. Take a vote.
Commissioner Baird, Commissioner Rana, Chair Woodson,
Yes.
Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner St. John,
Yes.
Commissioner Jacobson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Great. All right.
Chair, this is Seth Petta on the line. I just have a minor procedural suggestion. If it's easier in the future, the movement can just say, I move to adopt the staff recommended resolution with the changes just discussed or the following changes, so then you don't have to read through all of the now whereases, if you get what I'm saying.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, we don't do this often, Seth, but it's a good point. But I'm trying to remember the last time we've done that completely, but that's a good point.
That way you
But
avoid
it
avoid getting something wrong too.
Right, absolutely. And this is ultimately why other people make the motions and not me. Right. Okay, let's see, moving on. We have. What am I looking at? I'm looking at the wrong thing. Medical facility, there we go. The public hearing on the accessory structures and fence ordinance review and update. And that is Nick. You're
Good evening.
patiently waiting for me to get it right.
That's okay. Just waiting on the slides to be coming up, looking up in a few seconds.
1 second.
Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you.
Oh,
So,
no,
oh.
wrong one.
second.
Wrong one. I did not.
Looks
Yep, there we go.
looks good. So we brought this before you on April 10th as an informational item, just because it is quite a bit of changes. This is for proposed targeted changes to accessory structures, fences, and staff level review. Is the scope, but there's a little bit more to that, and I'll get into that in this presentation. So next slide, please. So we bring this before you today because we use the ordinance constantly. We help people at the counter. We bring items before you, and we keep notes. We keep track of all the different things that need to be updated, streamlined, made clarified. And our goal here is really to make the zoning ordinance more user friendly. We want to really streamline processes in line with, what's happening at the state. We really want to clean up things that don't need to be in the ordinance. Things have been removed, like the K district, for instance, and then formalize things that staff does on a daily basis and codify it properly. So next slide, please. Because it's quite a bit, here's a quick outline. I'm going to go over garden structures, use regulations for specifically beer and wine permits, fences, yards, staff approvals and procedures, and then also the updates to the residential districts for all these different changes. So first off, we have garden structures. Last time I presented, I showed you guys pictures of garden structures. This time I'm just going to talk about the changes. So we don't currently have garden structures in our ordinance. So we would be adding a definition to our ordinance. And this kind of came up last time about what is a garden structure, which is sort of a more generic term, but in the definition, we define it as an arbor, trellis, pergola, arches, other similar structures. And then we define within each of the districts, the zoning districts, that it's a permitted use. And then in the development standards, we talk about the size, the shape of what's permitted. And we also created in the staff level review process, the new chapter, we create a process for if someone goes beyond those approved by right sizes for these types of structures. Next slide, please. Now we come to beer and wine. So as I said in my last presentation, this is something that we brought to you over the last 3 going on 4 years now, multiple of these permits as use permits. This is typically an administrative use permit in other cities. Everyone I've worked for, and all the cities I've looked for on the peninsula also have this as an administrative use permit. This is really the goal of this is to support small businesses. So this is really to drive small businesses. I've had people come to the counter and say, I'd like to add beer and wine. What's the process? And I say, it's over $5,000 and it's going to take 2 to 3 months to get this permit. And then they turn around, they walk out. So the goal is really to help these small mom and pop shops and restaurants. Really, it's restaurants that are going to be really benefiting from this. We have a lot of restaurants that want to just serve beer and wine with dinner, and this is a way to help them. So next slide, please. Now we're getting sort of into like the more technical parts of this. So our fences ordinance is pretty rigid. If you want a fence over 6 feet, fence or a retaining wall over 6 feet in height, you need to get a variance to exceed it at this point in time. So we also have this issue where if someone wants to build a fence on top of a retaining wall, if the retaining wall is 1 inch over 3 feet, they need a variance for that as well. So our hope is to give a little bit of leniency there and allow it to be 4 feet. We find that 4 feet, a 4-foot retaining wall with a 5-foot fence makes more sense in a lot of situations. There's more topography, I think, in Marina than people originally understood. And so this is just giving a little bit more wiggle room. And then rather than it being a variance to exceed a 6-foot height fence, we determine that let's have a staff level review up to 8 feet in height. And then if it's beyond that, then it would be a minor variance rather than a full-on major variance. I'll get in more into the heights and stuff in the next slide, but just want to stay here for a second and talk about other things we've added to this section. So currently, our code does talk about visibility triangles in the ordinance. It's in 1070, and it's written out very clearly, but it's not in the actual development standards. And so I thought, hey, let's bring this into the development standards. Let's bring it right where planners are the ones that talk to people about fences every day. Let's bring it into the planning's world and just replicate what they already have, but put a diagram, make it really clear for people. So that way when applicants read the code, they know, oh, here's fences. Oh, I can't have, in this corner, I can't have a obstruction for vehicles. And so really want to make sure that the city is safe. So we're putting it right in that code. And then, most cities I've worked for and I've seen prohibit razor wire unless there's a public safety hazard. So we've defined that in this section, what we think a public safety hazard is. And then we've prohibited it unless they get approval by the community development director. And then we also incorporated temporary fencing. This is used for vacant lots, active building permits, and blighted properties. We want to make sure that we just codify that people can put up temporary fencing. And we want to also just straight prohibit establishment of new gated communities, which is consistent with our general plan. And next slide, please. So here we go to, this sort of breaks down the different heights. So you can see here that in the front yard setback, you can have a 3.5-foot fence or a 4.5-foot fence with a retaining wall. That's 1 foot. We're proposing to increase that to 2 feet. And similarly for a side and rear yard fence, increasing that from 3 feet to 4 feet. And then for staff level review, we're putting in there that if someone wants to propose to put a 6-foot fence in their front yard, they can, but only with staff level review up to 6 feet. Similarly, side and rear yard up to 8 feet, or if in combination with a retaining wall up to 12 feet in height. So this is, the code talks about this, but it has to be for reasons of privacy, safety. There's many different things we outline in the ordinance that what we would look at in this situation. And then also I just wanted to note here while we're on this slide that in looking at this right before we took this to publish the agenda, we noticed that we can clean this up even more. And what I've done is I've incorporated paragraph F, the language verbatim, into paragraphs A and B. So it's just cleaner. So there's one less paragraph. That way, when you read through it, you can see you can build a fence up to 3.5 feet or up to this height with staff approval, rather than having to go reference A and B in a different section. It's much clearer the way it is. And so I just wanted to mention that that's our plan to make that minor change. It doesn't change the substance of the ordinance, but our idea is to change that for the city council before we go to the city council. Next slide, please. So here we come to yards. So the main area of yards that we've modified is the accessory structures, not that are not habitable. So right now, our accessory structures that are not habitable code section is extremely confusing. When I first got here, I looked at it, I read it 10 times, and I still had a hard time with it. We've created a helpful guide, handout, printout that helps people with it, but it's really confusing. You basically have to go read the district standards. So let's say you have a house in the R1 district, you have to read all of the height and setback requirements in that section, and then you have to read all of the setback and height requirements in the yard section as well. And so what we've done is we simplified it and made it make more sense in both the zoning districts, residential zoning districts, as well as the yard section for setbacks. And we've also noticed that currently you're allowed by right to have a accessory structure within 1 foot of the fence. But we also know that state law has changed a lot since this code was written. You can now have an ADU in any existing accessory structure. So hypothetically, someone could come in, build a large accessory structure a foot from someone's property line, and then come back a year later and turn that into an ADU. And so our goal is to really eliminate that from happening as a permitted thing and make it more of something where we review it. So rather than having allowed by right up to 1 foot to the property line, we've said, okay, all accessory structures need to be 4 feet or further from the property line if they're allowed by right without planning's review. And then if they want to be closer, so if they do have an accessory structure that needs to be legalized, they can through staff level review. There are some situations, let's say someone built it illegally, it's a small little shed. Let's have a process for that. So that's our idea behind shifting this from the way it is. And then there's another part of the code that I've noticed that we really need to have, I believe, and this is really for stormwater reasons. We work closely with Public Works. We just had Edgar on the call, and we want to make sure that lots are not paved over completely. So going forward, we're recommending that the code says limiting the cement and hardscape coverage up to 50% of the lot, not including the buildings on the lot, so the home and the accessory structures. And the idea is that the water is retained on site, which is our requirement for all properties regardless, but this is just getting it closer to showing property owners what we expect. We hope that it won't be all impervious surface. So this is going to give us a little bit more teeth to go out and say, hey, you can't cover your whole property with concrete. Next slide, please. Now we come to staff approvals and procedures. So as I started working on these targeted updates, Allison noted that we didn't actually have a staff level approval and procedures ordinance. So she recommended that I look into adding that as well through this process. So I took this from another city and modified it to match the city of Marina. And so it outlines staff level decisions for administrative design review, administrative use permits, and minor variances. It goes through the process for having required findings, noticing requirements, and decision procedures. This table is pretty hard to read, but it basically says all the different types of permits that are staff level decision. And we didn't previously have minor variances in our ordinance. We did have it in the fee schedule, which is interesting, but we didn't have it in the actual code. And so I've outlined in this section, in this proposed chapter, what staff believes are minor variances, and they're for smaller changes. So if you want to modify, for instance, your yard by 10% or less. So let's say you have a rear yard setback and you want to reduce that by 10%, so 2 feet. So very, very small, something that is very minor. That would be something that staff would look at. So just as an example. So next slide, please. And this is the last major round of changes. Sorry, thank you for staying with me. This is all the different changes I've talked about reflected in the R1 and the R1, the R2, and the R3 and the R4 districts. So I've added garden structures to each of these, and I've fixed all the accessory heights to be reflective of proposed changes, so that the language is not super confusing, and it reflects the intent of the changes to the yards section that we talked about earlier. And then I did do some additional cleanup. I removed private stables. They're no longer viable. You have to have it. The requirement in the code, if you read about private stables, they have to be at least 1 acre lots, and we don't have any 1 acre lots anymore in R1. They've all been subdivided or are going to be subdivided for homes in the future. So we just don't have that. So it's not feasible as an actual use. We also mentioned these code sections do talk about the B district. We don't have a B district anymore in Marina. That's a holdover from the county of Monterey when we adopted their ordinances into our own back in 1975. So just cleaning that up. And then when at some point in the past, we had a height limit in R3 district, it disappeared. We don't actually have any properties zoned R3, but if we ever wanted to do that, let's say with a general plan update, I thought it would be wise just to put it back in. So I'm not changing what it was before. It's the exact same height and height and number of stories as we used to have in the ordinance about 7 or 8 years ago before it got accidentally removed with a different change. But I just wanted to add it back in. We actually did this with R4 as well about 2 years ago. Allison fixed that. I don't know how it happened, but it just happened. So just making sure everything's cleaned up makes sense. And yeah, next slide, please. Just want to quickly recap, conclude. So added garden structures, which weren't already there, really looking to help small businesses with beer and wine, looking to reduce variances and streamline the fence ordinance. Yards, really trying to make it clearer and for customers throughout the ordinance. Staff level approvals and procedures, really want to formalize this process so that it's codified, and then update, of course, all the residential districts as needed. So next slide. This is my recommended motion, and so I'm going to turn it back to the chair if you guys have any questions for staff.
Thank you, Nick, for that presentation. Go ahead.
Nick, thank you for that presentation. Going back to the area of fences,
Mhm.
where you specifically talk about razor wire.
Yeah.
So what about somebody puts up 2 or 3 height strands of spike like cattle wire? Is that permitted?
What kind of
Barbed wire.
barbed wire? Barbed wire is raised. Yeah. So let me see if I can find that exact section. So the code section, actually, this is just verbatim. Fences in any district may not constrain strands of barbed or razor wire, sharp or jagged glass, sharp or jagged metal components, e.g. razor spikes, or similar materials. The only exception shall be for properties that contain public safety hazards such as power plant facilities with hazardous material and or as determined by the community development director, which must receive an administrative use permit. So that's what the code section says explicitly. So
Okay, thank you. When you said it, you just called out razor wire. So
yeah,
that
so it's
scared
in,
me.
yeah, razor wire, all the types of dangerous, yeah. We don't want people to climb over these fences and get cut or hurt. So
We just want them to climb over the fence.
correct, exactly. You nailed
Thank
it.
you.
You don't climb over, you go through barbed wire.
You nailed it. That's exactly what we want. No, I'm kidding. I'm
All
kidding.
right. I'm not sure if we're gonna put 2 of them next to each other again,
That's
but now that we've done this, Commissioner St. John, you have questions now.
Thank you, Chair. On the garden structures, can you explain again for the ordinary homeowners, not a developer, a builder,
Mhm.
but a homeowner? He has a backyard or whatever. Does he need permits to put up any type of garden structure?
Typically, no, not usually. You don't need a building permit for these structures. It depends on how big they are. So if they're over 120 square feet, or if they have electrical or plumbing, for instance, then those would require a building permit. And then if they, so we have in the proposed section or in the fences ordinance, we have dimensions in there,
Right.
which is on page 110 of the packet. And it breaks down, if the garden structure is 36 square feet or less, it may have a solid roof, and it just kind of goes through. And if the garden structure is 100 square feet or less, may encroach into the setback. And then, if it looks like a fence or it acts, if it's on the fence, it's considered a fence kind of stuff. So it breaks down all the different areas and how big they are and allowed by right. And then if they go beyond these sizes, then they would need a permit for that.
Okay. So another example, like if it was a pergola,
Mhm.
that was, I think the code right now allows 120 square feet.
Correct.
So if it was 120 square feet or less,
Mhm.
then they have by right, they can erect it without a permit.
Typically, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Providing that it meets the other requirements of setback.
Setbacks and yeah, and height and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and this is, so we didn't actually have it in our ordinance before, and so we were treating structures as just accessory structures, right? So they were we were requiring that they follow all the rules for accessory structures, but they're really not accessory structures. They don't have a roof. They're not like physical four walls and a roof, right? So they're sort of different. They're usually plants grow on them. They're decorative a lot of times. Yeah. So we really wanted to call these that enhance people's gardens and say, you can have these in your yard. And these are how big they can be without a permit, basically. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Chang? Just going in order.
Thank you, Chair. Why you restrict the pergola to 120 square feet? Instead of the height,
We don't restrict it. We just say if you go 120 square feet or more, you need a building permit. That's just a building permit requirement. So that's not a planning requirement. It's a building permit requirement. We have the different restrictions on page 110. of
And
what
isn't
planning
the
would look at.
120 is actually, well, it's definitely county and I believe it's state.
That's building
the
code.
building code.
Yeah, it's in the
state
building code.
That if it's over 120 square feet,
Yeah,
yeah, kind of small, isn't it? 10 by 12.
correct.
Right,
Yeah.
that's
and
correct.
that's basically why, and that's why most shed places, when they sell them, don't go bigger than 10 by 12.
I
Yeah.
see. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, the next question I had is the concrete space. Is it you limit to 50%?
Hmm.
Maybe you didn't mention, I didn't hear it. Is there a reason for 50%?
It's what other cities have done. So we looked at what other cities have done, and they also did 50%. And we thought at 50%, you can still have half your yard open to the air and to permeable surface. So that's still retaining water half as much. So we have sandy soil here. We thought it would be appropriate. We sent this section to our engineer, to Edry de los Santos, and he said, that looks great. I'm really happy you're doing that. So
So what happens if they have an ADU? Does it rules apply?
So this is only talking about just open area. So if your
Open.
lot has a home and an ADU and a shed, we wouldn't look at that as part of this. That has its own lot coverage stuff as for the buildings. ADUs don't have any lot coverage requirements, but a home would and it sheds would. This is just for the open space beyond that, just to make sure that you don't have properties that are fully covered in cement. In situations where they are covered in cement, and the code section does sort of speak to this. If someone wants to go beyond 50%, what would have to happen is typically people have to engineer like a stormwater basin underneath the driveway or underneath the yard, which we're totally okay with, but we need them to do that, right? So that way they retain all the water on site. So what happens is they put this basin underneath the driveway, the water percolates into this catch basin, and then it goes into the ground slowly over time. So we require that for big developments, for big multifamily developments. It's not super normal in R1, like single family home zones, but if someone wanted to, they could come in and apply for that. And then Edry would look at that. Our public works engineer would look at that.
So for all these changes and for those who are not complying to this, and what kind of grace period you give to the owner to rectify it?
This would not be retroactive. So if someone has a yard that's fully paved over now, we wouldn't go after them for that. And if they can prove that they did it before this ordinance went into effect, then this wouldn't apply to them. So this would just be going forward for properties going in the future.
Yeah, how would you know is before?
Well, we have this Google Earth is really useful these days. We can look back in time for a long time. So
Your neighbors.
and your neighbors. Yeah. And it's
okay.
oftentimes the best is if your neighbor complains and then code enforcement will go out and look and say, oh, they're pouring concrete today. And this was adopted last month. So that will be the way. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Be nice to your neighbors.
I need to check my backyard.
or you need to hack Google Maps your photo history and replace the photo history. Not saying that that's possible. Okay, I've covered the entire left-hand side. Yeah, we are in order still. Great. Commissioner Rana.
Okay, supplement to this limit cement or hardscape coverage to 50%.
Uh-huh.
But this will only apply to the upcoming properties or new properties. What about the existing ones?
It applies to all of Marina. So
the
let me,
existing ones, someone is covering more than 50%.
Yeah, let's provide some context. So since I've been here, driving around, we've seen people pave over the entire front lawn with cement. That water ends up on your neighbor's property. The water should be retained on site. So working with Nick and the staff, I was like, hey, I'm assuming we have something in our code that says you can't pave over more than 50% of your lawn. Every city I work for has that. And no, we don't have that in the code. So we're really current properties, new properties, we're really just trying to discourage you paving over the entire front lawn, which affects us. Every year we have to file for our water quality regional permits. And we need to ensure that the stormwater is treated to a certain level and it's retained on site. So really that's what we're trying to do. And it actually lowers property values too. If all of your neighbors pave over the entire front lawn, it doesn't look good for the city. So that's what we're trying to do.
So if there are properties which have exceeded this 50%, they will be,
Well,
Grandfathered in.
everything we do here, when we bring things to you, we generally don't try to do it retroactively. We just, from this day forward, if we find it, that's when we would start enforcement. But we typically, when we adopt these ordinances, we don't go back. So,
Mhm.
We're gonna keep the streak. Ron, do you have any comments? All right, come back to her. I've got a few. First off, please correct cement to concrete in the text.
Oh.
If it's not. I will say that as a civil engineer, and my concrete professor would be rolling over in his grave if he saw cement.
okay,
Cement is a binder and activator, not the thing.
got it. Roger that.
So
Thank you.
Thank you. That's
I'll
why we
update-
come. That's why we bring these to you guys.
I think it's one of the five things I remember from my undergraduate degree was don't call it cement.
All right.
Cement is a binder. Okay.
So the second one is coming back to garden structures. I'm just going to go down the list. And I'm just kind of I know we talked about this a lot before, but I was thinking about two other things right now. The first is covered wood piles. Not really a garden structure, not really accessory structure either, or would it just be an accessory structure?
Just depends on how it's built, I guess.
Either way, it's just there. Okay. It's fine. Wood piles was one. Under beer and wine.
Yeah.
So coming back to promoting this on small businesses, if there are small businesses in our community, and this is where retroactive actually would be beneficial,
Right.
is there a way to make the beer and wine retroactive to anybody who has an open application currently in process?
We don't have any current applications for beer and wine currently.
But we can certainly do some outreach to the small business community, right?
Yeah,
And-
if this does get passed by city council, I plan to reach out to the 2 or 3 people I've talked to at the counter and let them know that this process has changed to see if
Okay.
that'll.
Because I know there are a couple of
Incentivize
businesses
it.
in our community right now that have beer and wine permits up.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that it hadn't already been addressed. It's just still sitting up there.
Yeah.
In process. So I wanted to make sure that if they were there.
Yeah.
We give them the benefit
Yeah.
of this new thing.
Yeah.
It's interesting you said
Absolutely.
that because I frequent Annie's place. Annie's there.
Yep.
And she cited that.
Yeah, she
She
wants.
said she wanted a beer and wine license,
Yep.
but $5,000 in the process was
Yep.
more than she could do.
She's one of the people that came to me.
There
So,
we go.
yeah, she's one of the examples is
And
Annie's place.
Bernie's is the new place next to AutoZone. Is I think
Yeah.
another one that's the one I've noticed is that they
Might be-
wanted. to
Might
do
be
that.
good, Nick, when we go to council to have her come speak to the council.
Yeah, Annie's place is good. I'll reach out to her
Where is Annie's place, Commissioner Jacob?
directly across from our office.
Like right there.
Oh,
It's the
It's
Chinese
it's the food
restaurant.
vending
oh,
Oh, yeah.
where the $1.99 breakfast used to be.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Yeah.
All right. No, we're not going to go. All right. I'm going to pause my questions because she's now very excited now. So do you have a set of questions? Do you have comments that you want to make? I'm just like, it's the food. Okay. She tricked me. All right. So my next question is on fencing. And so, gosh, fencing is all right. So I want to make sure, can we go back to the table on fences? Because I want to understand the difference between 12 feet and 13 feet. Because thank you very much for basic math.
So you're
But
saying,
the big difference is that it is 9 feet and 3 feet.
right.
But if it's 9 feet and if the retaining wall is 4 feet,
Hmm.
then the fence can be no more than
5
8
feet.
8 feet.
Oh, I say 4 feet, then yeah.
It
Yeah.
can't, it can only be 8 feet. The grand total is, it's got to be 12. It can't
Yeah.
be 13. So
That's at a staff level review, correct?
Right.
Mhm. Yeah.
I just want to make sure that I am reading it right, because if we increase the retaining wall, they're going to have to decrease it. And the
Yeah.
reason this comes up is that
Hmm.
the standard fence that you buy at Home Depot or any place else is a 6-foot fence.
Right.
And so that means that they would have to cut down that fence. And what happens at that point is you're moving it away from a privacy fence,
Mhm.
and now you're making it just a yard fence
Right.
at 5 feet.
So
Because I'm
yeah.
6 foot tall, and that means that I automatically can now look over the yard.
Yeah, I will say that the way we work through this for the most part now at the counter is if the fence and the retaining wall are on different property lines, then they don't count as the same structure. So if you have a retaining wall and then you have a foot over, you have a fence, those are two separate properties. So that's in the code still. That's one way we deal with it. The other is if someone wants to have a fence and a retaining wall, that they have to separate it horizontally by 3 feet. So that's already in the code. We're not changing that as well. So you could have a fence that's a retaining wall that's 6 feet tall, and then go 3 feet, and then have a fence that's 3 feet tall on this, or 6 feet tall on the same property. The 12 feet is 12 feet for a combination of a fence or retaining wall, and so that way you could have a retaining wall in some situations that's like 6-foot retaining wall and a 6-foot fence, for instance. So that's really, I didn't specify. So in our code now, we specify a 3-foot retaining wall with a 6-foot fence on top. And I'm giving a little bit of flexibility to that. And then for the staff level review, I just left it open to whatever they want to propose. And if it goes beyond a combination of both up to 12 feet, then it would go to minor variance, is the idea.
And I think this is the first part of the challenge that
Yeah.
exists with fencing.
Yeah.
Is we have a varied terrain.
Yeah.
And we have varied terrain with setbacks. We have varied terrain with setbacks with driveways at the midpoint,
Hmm.
and which then creates that offset. So you may have a 2-foot rise, have a side parking area into the front yard, then have a retaining wall or another fence further up.
Hmm.
And so it's you getting this aggregate as you go up, and
Yeah.
it can become very confusing for a lot of residents because they look at it and they don't understand it.
Right.
Which is then going to lead to my second kind of challenge
Mhm.
that I really would like to understand. I get it because I've now lived through it and I see it, but I still think it causes a lot of consternation. So I think that what I want to make sure is when we look at this table here is that it really is clarified. Okay, 12 feet,
Mhm.
whatever it's really the combination of 12 feet.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it could be a 4-foot, it could be a 3-foot, it could be 2 and 10, it could be
Right.
6 and 6.
Right.
The point is that 12 feet and below, ministerial, 12 feet and above, or above
It's-
12 feet.
It's 9 feet and below is ministerial. And then any combination is just adding 3 feet on top of
Right.
that. Yeah. And then getting rid of the 4 and
Right.
5.
So then 9 to 12 becomes minor.
Right.
And then anything above 12, you
Sorry. 9 and below is just by right. So someone can come build a 3-foot retaining wall with a 6-foot fence by right. I think they did that originally is because if you have a 3-foot retaining wall, you have a 1-foot. And so that way you don't need a building permit for that in some situations. I'm not going to go into the building permit because it's another world, but that's part of the reason. But we've run into situations where people build a 4-foot retaining wall and they need to have a fence on top because under the building code, you're required to have a guardrail of at least 42 inches. And so this is sort of like also addressing that a little bit. So we want to make sure that we're not creating codes that
Conflict.
create
conflict
safety
with the building
violations.
code? Because the building code is actually, that's safety and that's
Right.
almost.
Well, and
It's
that-
very important to make sure we don't conflict with.
And that's
building
what
codes,
creates the
yeah.
3 foot setback. And that
Yeah.
was the challenge with the 3 foot setback is if you put that 3 foot setback, it almost defeats the purpose
Right.
of having a retaining the fence line right up against. It's like, no, you either build it on top of that or you build it right behind it.
Right,
When you build it 3 feet off, you now have a sidewalk
right,
and now you can just walk right off the 4 foot.
right.
And we
Right.
don't want to have that. So I just want to make sure that as we read this is just going through and making sure maybe have some generic eyes that are none of us who are sitting here. Just
Mhm.
look and say, okay, does this make sense? And can I understand it?
Yeah.
Um,
And these numbers are based on just 3.5 years of counter work
Right.
here. And so this is on, this is. And I've talked to people leading up to this meeting at the counter in the last few months and talked to them about the changes we're proposing. And they were thrilled, like absolutely thrilled. And they said, we're going to wait 3 months and we're going to come right back in and we're going to do it once this goes, because it's giving people the flexibility to have privacy and security and do stuff that what we're talking about right now, where it actually works better for them. So I have had those set of eyes. They haven't read the track changes, of course. But I have verbally told them about them and they have been pretty excited.
so I think mine is just have just somebody generic off the street, read it.
Yeah.
I'm fine contextually.
Yeah.
Textual though, you just have somebody who can look at it and say, do they understand it? And if they don't, as long as they can come into you and get it, that's fine.
Right. Yeah.
It does lead to my second kind of question, and it's an intractable problem that I don't think can be solved, but it still frustrates me. Where is the front of property and where is side? We have a number of properties in our community that have been designed or in many cases modified over time.
Mhm.
And a kitchen door has now become a primary entrance to a unit.
Yeah.
Because they've added let's say a porch to the front and they've modified things. And so the front is no longer the front. And so the side becomes the front. The street facing is really now side and rear
Yeah.
and not front, which then changes the entire definition of front versus interior.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a way that we can really get around it.
Mhm.
Other than I guess what I come down to is the challenge with column 1 or the first column here is that we say front and side street setbacks versus interior and rear yard setbacks.
Yeah.
And we tie
right.
it to the main entrance of the building. But I think we should, or
Yeah.
are we tying it to the main entrance? What people consider the main entrance, or are we tying it to the street facade? And
It's really the street
facade.
It's the street facade. Yeah. So it's basically written like this. So that way, if you're pulling out your driveway, you have a 3.5 foot fence. You're not going to be blocked from seeing a kid walking on the sidewalk.
Right.
And it's street side yard and front yard setback. So it doesn't really matter if someone says my kitchen door is the street side and which should be the front yard and this is the street side. Because no matter what, in your front, if you have a fence that goes along the front property line, it has to be 3.5 feet for the front in R1, 20 feet or 14 feet to 20 feet. So our street side yard setback in R1 is 20% of the lot width, not to exceed 20 feet and not to be less than 14 feet. So in that 14 feet, in the smallest situation, you can't have a fence that's taller than 3.5 feet by right or 4.5 feet with a 1 foot retaining wall currently.
So I think as long as that's fine, and as long
Yeah.
as people understand, the standard is that it's the facade, it's not the building orientation.
Right. And that's exactly right. And then we did have the staff level to go up to 6 feet in these situations. Because there are these weird lots that are like all like at the end of a cul-de-sac and they're just like, and they want a backyard and they can't have a backyard. And so in that situation, it would be planning, charging a planning permit fee. They would submit for that. They could get a 6 foot fence in their front yard setback to some degree in a situation that's vetted by the traffic engineer and is safe and is not going to cause issues with like driveways and people walking on the sidewalk. So maybe it's set back, maybe, so it would be something where staff needs to really get involved and make sure it's safe and okay. But
May I piggyback?
Sure.
Here we're talking about fences and I'm just thinking about a property that's actually on my street. What about trees, bushes,
yeah,
those kinds of things? Because
they're well over 3.5 feet and they're blocking.
The only place in the code that talks about bushes and trees and all that will be in this corner visibility triangle. So in that situation, you cannot have if you have a tree, it has to be limbed, so it's a certain height. And if you have a fence or a bush, they have to be trimmed to 2.5 feet or shorter. So in that visibility triangle on corner lots, you can't have bushes and trees and stuff like that.
Now, if
That
we
are
have,
blocking the view.
if we have a sidewalk,
Mhm.
right, and then we have that little parklet kind of a thing, and then does that apply to both of those? Or does it only apply to the main property
It's,
before you get to the
Hmm.
sidewalk?
yeah, I mean, it would apply to both because we have jurisdiction and the landscape strip is city, it's public right of way. So we can go in there and we can cut down bushes if we need to. That's Public Works jurisdiction. That's their world. This is speaking mainly to private property because that's where planning has jurisdiction, so to
Okay.
speak. I shouldn't say jurisdiction. There's probably a better
Yeah.
word than jurisdiction.
So,
but-
so there are regulations around shrubs and trees that would block.
Yeah,
Exactly, yeah.
yeah. And Marissa, our code officer, is actually
But
gone
they're,
after a couple people this year for that.
but they're not from arbor becoming fence.
Correct. Yeah,
And
so you,
somebody,
yeah,
could- if it's not a fence is a physical manufactured constructed thing, and that
Mhm.
falls in its requirement.
Yeah.
If I put a set of butterfly bushes in, and over 20 years, those grew up to 10 feet tall on the front of my property, and I had them basically create a wall,
Yeah.
that would not fall underneath the code.
that's
But-
correct.
But
Yeah.
I think Commissioner was talking about, correct me if I'm, but if it's going into the public right of way.
Right, yeah, it
That-
can't.
Right,
that's a
but-
code
but-
issue.
But if you wanted to use,
Yeah.
if you wanted to do the Garden of Eden wall maze thing and make that your side thing, that's totally allowable. Because-
Unless you're on a corner and it's blocking visibility.
Well, it's as long as
Yeah.
you cut the corner and you meet the triangle issue.
Correct.
But
25 feet from
you
the
could
corner.
have literally a 10-foot arbor garden fence around and that you
Mhm.
could create on your property and wall it off.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
Not many people, I mean, I don't think it's standard. I don't know if anybody in Marina, I've seen it, but I
Yeah,
guess
it's-
you could do it if somebody wanted to.
Yeah.
It does open up, coming back to this, made me think about it. So we have multiple blocks that are city property, city right of way, unpaved,
Mhm.
where we have trees that are encroaching and are technically in the city right of way, but have historically and are still treated as private property unless somebody really complains about it. That really just becomes a code enforcement or just talking to Public Works, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's something we look at case by
Okay.
case basis, I'm
So
guessing.
somebody, if they saw that as an issue, they would report it and then it was, okay, is this private property or is this city? If it's city, then the city would come out and fix it.
Yeah.
Okay. Next up, fences, staff effort, top fence yards, accessory structures, talked about that, concrete. Beer and wine. That was it.
Excellent.
I got through the whole process. Yes.
Just new. The new administrative use for Beer One.
Mhm.
So you said other properties had to pay $5,000 to get the license.
Mhm.
Would that create any kind of issue for businesses that had to go through the process and pay $5,000 and now find out that they could just get administrative use for beer and wine and get away with all the payment in the processes?
Well, no, I mean, we enforce the rules as written when somebody applies for a permit for that day. And until a project is deemed complete. So, no.
You don't foresee any.
And I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, but I think you said we don't actually have any right now.
We do not.
It's just that the last 3.5 years that Nick and I've been here, we've brought in 4
Mhm.
of these to you guys, and I think unanimously, I think we even asked, the reason why we added this to this is I think I recall asking you guys about a year ago, said, we as staff don't think it's appropriate to bring this to the planning commission. If you recall, it was a family that was here in the back. And we asked you guys, would you support us if we changed the code to allow these to be done at a staff level so that these families are not burdened? I believe we got almost unanimous consent. So, but retroactively, no, there won't be an issue.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
but to the commission's point, I think Nick's taken note that he's going to reach out to Annie's
Annie's place. Mhm.
and if there's other businesses to come
Mhm.
speak to the council if the commission recommends approval today. So,
Thank,
Well, the only thing I would say, coming back to the 50%, what I would add, that from an engineering perspective, is also there's a groundwater recharge. So we need to have some better- there's runoff in it, but there's also technically the heat island reduction issue.
Is your mic on?
No. So going back to it, I think, so part of it is not just a runoff issue, it's a groundwater recharge issue.
Mhm.
So you want to make sure that we have the ability to retain water on site, but it's really how do you recharge the groundwater technically?
exactly.
There's a heat island reduction issue for environmental of just having more impervious surface reflects, and it just heats up the entire environment, which we don't want. Even though some days I feel like I want that in my house, to have a little more heat retention. And then really just the overall hardscape, pollution runoff issues, environmental protections. I think those are kind of the big things that I used to run into with site planning. Question I have is, we picked concrete and we didn't pick asphalt, and that's not a big deal. I could go less because it says hardscape but
The code does say asphalt.
does it say asphalt in the code?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Mhm.
Last question I have, and this, I knew I had it, I just couldn't remember. So it's really kind of the philosophical hardscape issue where a developer, a resident comes in and physically brings in a compactor and compacts, adds caliche and a little bit of clay,
Mhm.
and they create a hardscape. But it's not officially a hardscape.
Mhm.
It's not asphalt, it's not concrete, they've kind of played with this system to fit into a gray area that creates a parking spot that is actually impervious,
Mhm.
but it doesn't meet what we would consider as a driveway that's asphalt or concrete.
Mhm.
And I have seen that in multiple areas around town. And that it's one of those where, okay, it's still barren ground, and technically you could say, oh, well, water could, or rainfall or anything could leach into the ground. But the reality is it won't, because it's been compacted so hard or to such a high degree that for all intents and purposes, it's just it's an improved dirt road that people can park on. Right. I mean, is it just a minor point and we just let it go? Or I don't know
Yeah,
how
I
would we
mean,
address something like that?
so maybe I'll just read this paragraph P to you, and you can see if this addresses, because I think it does. Stormwater runoff limitations. Impermeable surfacing may not exceed the stormwater runoff design for the parcel or lot and must not cause runoff to affect adjacent property. Properties located in residential districts shall not cover the front, side, or rear yard, not including buildings and accessory structures with impermeable surfaces, such as, it says cement, but we're gonna change it to concrete, asphalt or hardscape, more than 50% of the yard, including the driveways. So
So maybe when you combine impervious with hardscape.
with hardscape, so
that
if they
it
make a
fits- it fits-
hardscape,
Yeah, they
that's-
basically kind of,
yeah,
they've made that.
yeah. If they create an impermeable hardscape that's not asphalt or concrete, then we can
Right.
look at that as well with this section, I believe. I think it's enough there that we could look at it
Okay.
from an enforcement standpoint, yeah.
Yeah. I said, not a big deal. That was the last thing I was thinking about. Okay. Any other questions from anybody? I've spoken more than enough. Would somebody like to make a motion? Somebody on this side? Commissioner Rana.
I move to adopt PC resolution number 25-07, recommending that the city council adopt an ordinance to amend title 17, adding section 17.04.305, garden structures. Section 17.42.060 fences, and chapter 17.55 staff of rules and procedures. And amending sections 17.42.020 use regulations, 17.42.055 height, and 17.42.070 yards, with corresponding updates to residential districts 17.06, 17.08, 17.10, and 17.12 in the Marina to municipal code. The proposed amendments are exempt from environmental review for section 15.61 B3 of C4 Act.
Chair Woodson, I'm sorry to interrupt the motion, but I didn't catch you before this to make sure we do public comment. Did you already do that?
Oh, good point. I did not. Thank you very much for reminding us. Go ahead and take this back for a second. And is there anybody who would like to add public comment? Thank you for saying that.
There's nobody online, Chair Woodson.
So public comment is closed. Seth, does he need to reread the motion?
No.
Thank you. Would somebody like to second the motion?
I'll second it.
Perfect. We now have a second.
Commissioner Barron,
Yes.
Commissioner Rana,
Yes.
Chair Woodson,
Yes.
Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner St. John,
Yes.
Commissioner Jacobson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Okay, that is done with item 7 on the agenda. Next up on the agenda is informational items. We have an update on the Hillcrest Avenue, basically the downtown vitalization of specific objective design review.
This is going to be very brief. This is me as well. So the property just down the street from here, 2021 Hillcrest Avenue. This is a property located in the downtown vitalization specific plan. And this is an informational item regarding a staff level ministerial objective design review that we've done recently. Next slide, please. So on April 17th, 2025, Guido, the Community Development Director, approved 15 units to be constructed at this site. The project is completely consistent with the downtown vitalization specific plans, development standards for multifamily residential districts, as well as the objective designer guidelines and standards in the DVSP. And it is also consistent with state law, including density bonus and AB 2097. Next slide, please. So this is the site. Like I said, it's across the street and down a few houses or a few properties, just down the street from here. Next slide, please. This is a typical elevation. What you'll see, there's going to be 3 buildings on the site. Each one's going to have 5 units, and they're going to look like this. And next slide is questions. So very, very short.
Yeah, so just some context. So council, through the adoption of the downtown specific plan and objective zoning standards, granted the staff the ability to approve these at a staff level. We're very appreciative of that, but we're also being mindful that we want to be transparent. So my direction I gave to the staff was, if an objective zoning standard project is approved at my level, we will always report out to the commission that this is what we've done, so that you guys know that we're not just going off on crazy land doing weird stuff. So really it's really for transparency purposes. So it's 15 units. It's going to be just right down the street. And we're working through some other issues on the property, but yeah, we just wanted to brief the commission.
Yep.
So
I do have a couple questions about this
Sure.
project.
Yeah.
So first off is it has this really cool big Monterey pine that's been stripped of all of its branches
Yeah.
below 25 feet. So it looks like a Monterey pine palm.
Mm-hmm.
Does that, when we remove that, because it's residential, it's
Mhm.
R1, right, it's their tree to remove,
It's actually not R1, it's multifamily.
multifamily.
They went to the tree committee in March,
Okay.
and the tree committee with Richard St. John on the committee approved the removal of that tree as well. They hired an arborist, and the arborist said the tree is in fair condition. It used to have multiple trunks. I think it was 3 trunks originally. And over the years, the previous property owner, I think, cut them down somehow. And limbed it to be the way it is. It used to be a big, like lush, huge tree, and now it's this very like just one.
Actually, it looks like a palm.
And that was staff really liked that tree a lot. I mean, it's a very prominent tree, and it's a cypress tree, which we like. Due to the grading in the site, they could not save this tree. It just didn't make sense for the site. They couldn't develop it without cutting it down because there is topography. Like the topography is it's sloped as you go down Hillcrest. So they have to grade the site, flatten it, and then build structures where that tree will be is currently. So they will replant the tree. And then one of the conditions that the tree committee put on the project is that they will replant one cypress tree as a prominent tree on the site. It's going to be, to your point earlier in the previous item, I think it'll be a 24-inch box. So it'll be a bigger tree right out the gate. We want to see a bigger cypress tree right away. So we gave that direction to them, and that will be sort of the anchor for what they'll have as a community space with a barbecue, some sitting area, which is part of the downtown vitalization specific plans objective design standards, right? So we say, if you're going to develop housing, we want to see a community space. We want to see these types of things, amenities for the residents. So yeah, we went through that with the tree committee with Richard and the rest of the tree committee members. Yeah, that was part of the process. So even though it is ministerial for the design side of it, it still has to go through any other process. So yeah, if there's any other pieces to it, like tree removal, for instance. Yeah.
So my second question, which I think is we have no control over, is the main distribution line, power line for Hillcrest comes up on that side of the road. And actually, I think the pole on that one actually is inside the property line from an easement perspective. And it's a entangled kind of mess. Is there, as this is built out, number one, it's going to have to have a lot of power that comes into the complex from a above ground versus buried. I'm just going to leave it at that. I mean, that pole is already a disaster.
Yeah.
And that pulling 24 units into that, I would hope that it would be undergrounded, but that maybe at the same time we could, I don't know. It's just
We'll have, I mean, for
we're kind
power
of stuck
poles,
with what we're kind
yeah.
of stuck with what PG&E wants to do.
yeah,
And
exactly.
gosh knows I don't
Yeah.
want to slow down development
Yeah.
and put any demand on PG&E.
Yeah. So yeah, we that's something where PG&E makes the call. So we have limited ability. The applicants are it's Revision West is the applicant, and they do developments all over the peninsula. So they're pretty seasoned developer in terms of housing they've done. So I'm sure they've already reached out and looked at maybe some solutions to that power pole. I'm not quite sure. They just had a meeting. They had a pre-construction meeting with building last week. So they're just starting to get going on submitting building. They haven't quite submitted a building permit yet, but they're already starting those processes, and we'll be continuing to work with them as they go forward. So.
No, and that's it. I don't want to slow them down, because by the time you get to PG&E distribution to hook the power up, because their distribution crews have to do that can completely bog a project down for a year.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to create an issue that PG&E just, magically it drops in their backlog.
Yeah.
Next couple, that's all I have about that project. Anybody else? Okay. Okay, so I have,
Question.
yes.
Go ahead.
Paul,
You go ahead.
I think Paul was first.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, just looking at the description here, the building had total 15 units, all right?
That's correct.
And then the project include only 5 off-street parking.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So would that be a problem?
It could be a problem. It's not so in my very, very brief PowerPoint presentation, I mentioned it's completely consistent with state law, including density bonus and AB 2097. And that 5 parking spaces is directly the result of AB 2097. And so
You might want to explain the.
AB 2097 was passed 3 years ago by the state legislature. And what it says is, if you have a project that's within a half mile of a major transit stop or a future major transit stop that's identified in a regional transit agency plan, then there's no minimum parking requirement for residential development such as this. So they chose to, they're gonna do 4 parking spaces and 1 ADA space, and 2 of them are gonna have like EV charging. So that if you do any EV charging, you have to do it as well with the ADA, or yeah, the accessible space. So they'll have 2 chargers. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a,
so basically what Nick's trying to say is technically they didn't have to require any parking.
correct, yeah.
And because Nick's a good project planner, he got at least 5 parking spaces out of them. So he did a good job of at least trying to
Yeah.
get something, because yes, that is the state law that we're under.
And that's gonna become more and
So-
more, and I'm assuming right off the bat, it's already, the biggest one is we've got Palm Avenue MST that's going in within a third of a mile.
Yeah, yeah, that'll be a big transit stop pretty soon.
Yeah.
So even though it's not required, but I believe the residents were a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have
Yeah.
to work through those. Yeah, it'll be tough. Yeah.
That's not an issue, that's well, it's gonna go to my questions on the staff project updates, because I have some questions there. Yeah, well, it's a valid point, and
Yeah.
we're gonna, the rules were built around urban city environments and not small towns and cities
Yeah.
like Marina.
But it's a good
And-
point. We appreciate you pointing that out, Commissioner Chang, because that was one of the reasons why it took me so long to support the approval, because I wanted to make sure we were correct on that law in terms of how we were interpreting it. So we worked really closely with our city attorney's office, because I shared your same concern, Commissioner Chang.
Thank
So-
you.
No, I mean, it's right here, and we already see it. We see it when there's a heavy council meeting or a big issue, there's no parking.
Mhm,
And that's up here, and then on that street,
mhm.
where are they gonna go? It's gonna go down, it's gonna actually have to go down the street and around the corner.
Yeah.
Because the street parking is already pretty much filled up already.
Yeah.
So, I think that is gonna be an issue that more and more the residents of Marina and a lot of our neighborhoods, especially our more densely packed neighborhoods, that start seeing these type of developments go in. Because this is the second one that's gone in within 2 blocks. Because literally on the back side of that development is our fourplex.
Yeah.
That's going in. I mean, I think it's literally opposite that, isn't it?
It is. Oh, it's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like parallel, but yeah, it's right behind it. Yeah.
So, and then I think they put 4 into theirs.
Yeah, they did 1-to-1. So
Yeah.
for every unit, they did a parking space. Mhm.
Great. So Commissioner St. John, you had a question too?
Thank you. Mine was the same. I would just be an echo of Paul's. I was just concerned about the parking, and I wanted to refresh my memory that there was no parking stalls on site, just these 5 off site.
Yeah, those are 5 on site. Yeah.
5 on site.
5 on site. Yeah. Mhm.
5 off street parking.
5 off-street parking
Okay, yeah.
on the site.
site.
Yeah,
On
sorry.
site, yeah, on site.
Sorry. Yeah, that's a confusing way of writing it now that I think about it.
So the first residents get Dibby dues, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that'll work. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, thank you.
But what I would say is that's not the only one that we have around here. We've got the new apartment complex that is opening up right up here. That's got off-street parking in the back, behind the laundromat and everything. And or behind, basically behind Lucky's and it's been sandwiched. It's the same thing. They don't have enough parking for the number of apartments. It's not even 1-to-1. I mean, it's just, that's where we're at. But now moving on to number 9, Guido. So we have these projects that are coming in and are moving on relatively quickly towards construction or design and construction. We have other projects that are not. Can we, in next month, maybe just kind of get an update on some of the projects that, like Del Monte Gardens one, the 2 apartment, the 2.
3298 Del Monte.
Yeah.
Absolutely, we can give you guys
If we
an
could
update.
kind of get an update on some of these, also on the apartment complex behind the MST station.
Del Monte.
and- Trying to think what are other ones that are kind of just been hanging out. Just if there's anything that's been hanging out for a while that we haven't been updated on, it doesn't have to be much at all. Just be a couple bullet statements of, hey, just where things stand.
Absolutely, we could do that.
Because I think a couple of those are getting ready to come up shortly. They're going to come up in the next few months on hitting another year.
We can certainly give an update.
So I,
And if the commission thinks of other ones when you're walking around town, you could just ping me and we can add it to the list and we'll just do like a one-page memo that we can add. So that's fine.
all right,
So-
I think that's it for that. I have, we'll see, major projects, staff, it's not me. But it's not correspondence. Reminder to everyone, do we not have? What is the thing we have coming up? The groundbreaking for the First Avenue Station is coming up. So if you want to go to that and see that, that's coming up shortly. That's a big deal. And that's going to set off a number of, it's the next phase to move things along. So let's see, that's all I had on my side to update. Correspondence. Last one, adjournment.